There we go. We are live, so we'll give everyone just a minute to start piling in. For those of you listening to the recorded session, hello and how are you doing? This is your friend John the Morgile for Season 2, Episode 3 of Static Plain Truth Live. And real quick before I get started, with me, I've got the lovely Kristen Wolf. Kristen, how you doing?
I'm doing great, John. How are you doing today?
Awesome. Awesome. I'm just going to start it off by going over some stuff that I was writing today, and that way it'll give all the other panel members a chance to sort of shuffle in, and then we'll just open it up. So without further ado, righto. So growing up in Florida, I thought it was kind of odd from a heliocentric perspective that any one state or particular area on this spinning sphere would be a lightning capital of the country or lightning capital of the world for that matter. And indeed, Florida receives more lightning on average than any state in the US. And if I'm not mistaken, it's high up there in terms of per capita or per annual lightning strikes than any other place in the world. So that, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I sort of thought that any place on the spinning sphere would be just as prone to lightning than any other place. But indeed, Florida is very prone to lightning for some reason. So, of course, now there is no full true explanation or real scientific explanation for the phenomenon of thunder and lightning in the heliocentric spinning sphere Earth model for some reason. And if we consider the static plane model, sort of like Nikola Tesla did, lightning actually begins to make sense, especially if we consider the world as a perfectly balanced plane with a negative charge and enveloped in an enormous electromagnetic field generated by an EM vortex in the central north, if you subscribe to that model or if you're humoring that model. Um, there are obviously other flat Earth models, and until we're able to truly explore the outskirts of the sun's visible path and do, geodetic surveys of areas like the international date line and up and down that meridian, there's I think that there's some keys to unlock there. Now, could you imagine, though, if our forebears would have spent gazillions of dollars exploring the world as opposed to faking space, how many answers we'd have by now? Instead, we got a bunch of cheap B film reels and cartoons a la Apollo and Pioneer 10, where you've got light and yogurt and astronauts pretending to play golf on the moon and basically just brainwashing people. Now, I'm certain that whatever's beyond, south or north of the sun's visible path, so we're talking either beyond the 90-degree latitude north or south, the powers in charge of the world militaries found it a large enough threat to the status quo that they pulled out and set up boundaries along with keep out signs. They'll never willingly admit to decades of lies and stealing our money, so we'll continue getting cheap B film reels from NASA. And the majority of people will believe it's real and snub their nose at anyone trying to tell them it's fake, cartoons, and now, of course, CGI. And it's kind of funny because Hollywood does a better job faking space than NASA, but I sort of think that's by design. I think NASA deliberately makes their space footage extremely, be real because they don't want to get too grandiose in the fakery. And that's sort of a smart move. That's why they never show you stars or landmarks on the ground from the ISS live footage. Although you'd think after all these years up there in the thermosphere, as they allege, they would have strapped a camera to the top of the ISS looking out into space, but they never show you anything but clouds and water and nondescript deserts and more clouds and water. NASA doesn't even need to make their images appear realistic anymore because people simply do not second guess the spherical Earth pictures and animations unless they're first unplugged and deprogrammed, which is really the result of a conscious decision for each person to make. In other words, the first reaction any educated person has to being introduced to this topic of the flat Earth is to chuckle it off and assume that this person is an idiot. And we're all pretty much guilty of this, I can almost guarantee it. So we really need to help people get past that point and really look into this topic. And in this regard, I see flat Earth as being extremely successful in the past year or two. And this really means that I think we have a responsibility. We flat earthers can help to unplug and deprogram people from this terrible sort of silly lie involving the spherical spinning earth. However, it's still up to the individual person to really reconsider everything they've been taught about theoretical physics and their, science fiction paradigm, which is really pervasive. There's a ton of pre-programming going on in the American culture from the time that we're old enough to pay attention to a television, and they're in just about every room for the rest of our lives. We're a culture that has based our lifestyle on a paradigm of infinite space and aliens, where this little planet could be just a speck of dust in our rearview mirrors a couple generations from now. The problem is they always kick that can down the proverbial hallway, and they've been promising the public this daydream involving space travel and moon bases and aliens since the 1950s. And the technology to really drive it home, to really get us those bases, is always right around the corner, always a couple generations away. But we never really see anything of value or true merit in terms of exploration coming out of these space programs, except, of course, more programming. But what if, though? What if we had spent all that billions of dollars since NASA's been around in actual exploration of our world, the oceans, what's north and south of the 90-degree latitudes? Furthermore, and this is sort of changing topics, we make most of our decisions subconsciously. Without doing much thinking about the decisions. However, we spend a great deal of time forming our worldview or our paradigm. Most of the world, including and especially the structures of power, are run by essentially lunatics who think that this world is just a stepping stone to the next. And people really believe this because of the culture of programming. In reality, this is the only physical plane in existence as far as we can tell. And exploring the stars is nothing more than science fiction and folly. But unfortunately, most people have been tricked into thinking along these same lines. If you're awake to this, as well as awake to subliminal pre-programmed response triggers inserted into most media, it becomes so obviously pervasive. Our culture and paradigm is literally overstuffed with science fiction programming, so it can be extremely difficult to walk people through this and wake people up to this. They have to let go of this romantic idea of space travel and other worlds, and yes, Star Wars, relativity, etc. Over the years, my research has always led me sort of time and time again to this pervasive subliminal programming going into the public's collective subconscious. And I honestly had no idea just how grandiose and pervasive and overwhelming it actually was until, we sort of stumble on flat Earth, and it's like just whoa, it's all over the place. Once you're awake to the fact that the world isn't a spinning sphere, but a stationary plane, the amount of globe Earth propaganda and subconscious inserts are just alarming. These symbols and psychologically related emotions, and finally the companies benefiting from such associations in our minds, are probably doing this to intentionally conceal the fact that they are probably not doing this to intentionally conceal the fact that the world isn't a spinning sphere, but instead people in charge of branding and advertising reflect their worldview into the artwork and help to reinforce this terrible, silly lie unintentionally. In other words, not everyone is in on this, but everyone who's plugged into the lie will subconsciously help to reinforce the fallacy without any intention to deceive others. And I'm just going to end this sort of diatribe with a couple of unexpected quotes. This one, I was looking for a quote regarding propaganda from Joseph Goebbels. He was in charge of Nazi propaganda back in the time, of World War II and Hitler. And I did find the quote, but when I was searching for the verbatim quote, I found this as the first quote of Joseph Goebbels on Wiki. It's not exactly related, but I'm just going to read them both because I thought that I actually agreed with him. I was like, that's kind of odd. I agree with the Nazi. Don't label me as a Nazi or call me or whatever. But so here's the quote. Again, this is Joseph Goebbels. It is rotten and dismal that a world of so many 100 million people should be ruled by a single caste that has the power to lead millions to life or to death, indeed on a whim. This caste has spun its web over the entire earth. Capitalism recognizes no national boundaries. Capitalism has learned nothing from recent events and wants to learn nothing because it places its own interests ahead of those of the other millions. Can one blame those millions for standing up for their own interests and only for those interests? Can one blame them for striving to forge an international community whose purpose is the struggle against corrupt capitalism? Can one condemn a large segment of the educated Sturmer youth for protesting against the greatest ability? Is it not an abomination that people with the most brilliant intellectual gifts should sink into poverty and disintegrate, while others dissipate, squander, and waste the money that could help them? You say that old properties class also worked hard for what it has. Granted, that may be true in many cases, but do you also know about the conditions under which workers were living during the period when capitalism, quote, earned its fortune? And I would imagine that was not very good conditions. So that wasn't the quote that I was looking for. And again, don't label me as a Nazi or a communist, but I would just say that I agree with that statement. So chilling. So here's the quote I was looking for, and then we'll open it up. So if you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. The lie can be maintained only for such time as the state can shield the people from the political, economic, and/or military consequences of the lie. It thus becomes vitally important for the state to use all of its powers to repress dissent, for the truth is the mortal enemy of the lie, and thus, by extension, the truth is the greatest enemy of the state. End quote. So, with that, we'll just open it up. It looks like we've gained Patricia Steer and Antonio Subarats. How y'all doing today?
I'm doing great, John. Thanks for having me on your show. Interesting
Hey.
stuff that I joined right in the middle of you reading.
Yeah, I planned it that way, so perfect. And Antonio, how you been, man?
I'm doing good. I can't believe you're such a Nazi.
Right. Sorry. No, it
No,
was a
but
good
hey,
quote.
yeah, the quote. When you put it in context, there was so much wisdom coming out of what they were saying. You know, not to paint me
Well,
myself.
no, I mean about capitalism, they're so right, and we've, I don't know about you guys, but we were sort of raised in this era or this culture where capitalism is thought of as the best way to run a system, and it's basically the faith that people will be greedy, right? I mean, that's what capitalism boils down to, is that people will, at the end of the day, as long as, you have a way to sort of punish and reward them, they can be controlled through the monetary supply. I mean, that's the way I see capitalism, and I think it's well, I disagree. I think it's a terrible way to run a country or an entire culture.
Absolutely, because apart from anything else, one of the qualities that it entails in society is status anxiety.
Oh,
And
oh
you
goodness!
know,
And then, well, y'all didn't have Ronald Reagan over there with his trickle-down economics. Oh, geez.
I was in high
yeah,
school during that time frame. Yep.
mhm.
Lots of greed just in the culture at that time. That's when there were TV shows like Dynasty, and with all the glitzy jewelry and the glamorous women and the money and the cars, and that was the yuppies, and that sort of thing was happening.
And let's not forget Dallas
Oh, of course, Dallas. And I live in
with the
Houston
Bush
now, so
family. With the
yes,
Bush family.
exactly. And I live in Houston, and the Bush family lives pretty close to here, or at least part of the Bush family. So that culture is still uh, happening here, big time. So
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm.
those damn Bushes, I'll tell you, they've been in U.S. politics for several generations, and well, we haven't seen much of them since, well, yeah, that's right, Jeb Bush. He was the governor of Florida forever. He ran for president, and thank God. I mean, but what are we left with, though? Donald Trump, really? That is
who do you
just,
think is going to win, John? Not that it matters.
yeah, it doesn't matter. I don't think Hillary could possibly win, but it, Donald Trump is like, I don't know. He's a game show host, right?
What about the conspiracy that there's going to be some kind of martial law in the United States and
We've been
Obama
under
will retain his presidency?
Yeah, we've been under martial law for years. All they have to do is say the word, and it's enacted. Um,
Well, all people need to do is have to say the word, and people believe it's going to happen.
Right. Well,
That's the
people are,
thing.
yeah, it's scary because people are pre-programmed to act a certain way. If something happens, it's up to us to act positively and get through it. But what's actually going to happen is people are going to do what they see on TV. I mean, that's the scary outcome. And if you watch any of these disaster movies or like the Walking Dead show, which is one of my favorites, um, you see people that they just act irrationally, and that's how people are programmed to react if something was to happen where the ATM stops working or everyone's talking about this EMP threat. Um, when you realize that intercontinental ballistic missiles are probably not even possible, then this whole idea of a EMP threat from the Russians
Hmm.
is just so laughable. And
Isn't that a relief? Isn't it a
yeah,
relief?
it really is. From a flat earther's perspective, Russia and the United States have a very strong and vibrant relationship, but it's just sort of kept behind closed doors. And I think that, the world is a stage is a very true statement, and they are actors on that stage, sort of pulling at our heartstrings through the mass media, and they really do a good job of it, I think, in most cases. But um, I don't know. It seems like flat Earth wakes people up to all this, and so it really is sort of a beautiful thing, that it's just this key that unlocks all of these different aspects. That it's I don't know. Do y'all feel that way too? It's just like it
Yeah.
unlocks everything. I mean, it unlocks everything from subliminal messages to pre-programmed responses, and it's in there with science and even history. I mean, just everything isn't what it seems, and flat Earth is the key to all this, isn't it?
It's
Absolutely. It unlocks nature.
Yes, I
Not
was just going to say,
yeah, not,
all these positive things come from it too, including, well, you go ahead, Antonio.
yeah, like the physical nature, as in things growing and energies moving, but also like the more internal nature, the nature of humanity. Is pretty cool because you see all the problems that are brought around uh, based on scarcity, based on all the fallacies. They all come from people who don't understand that the world is flat, so they don't see the actual nature of reality. They have this illusory version of reality that they act and react on, and that's why we have the problems.
Well, I've been looking into subliminal programming in the mass media for years, and it doesn't really strike you how really, and I said in the little intro there, how pervasive it is with this spinning globe Earth thing. But it's really in so many corporate logos. I'll just do a quick screen share and show anyone watching out there what I'm talking about. Hopefully that worked. I've got something queued up here. Where'd they go? Here we go. So like all these corporate logos, it just goes on and on and on with the globe. The globe's everywhere. It's in Universal Pictures. It's in all these different logos, and I don't think that people are actually doing this intentionally. People are reflecting what their belief system is, and by doing so, they've reinforced this lie intentionally, right?
Mm-hmm.
My brother owns a clothing store in New Orleans, Louisiana. I owned one there too. Um, his clothing store, I named it actually. It's called Culture Vulture. It's rock and roll clothing. He's into, rock music and concert T-shirts and stuff like that. Anyway, when he was trying to think of a name, this is way before Flat Earth, okay. I was coming up with names, and I came up with the name Culture Vulture, since he's going to have lots of different things from various cultures there. And he was going to use a vulture because it kind of goes with the metal music that he likes.
Yeah, that's
And
awesome.
the vulture was going to be standing on top of, okay, here's my idea, a globe
Right.
holding a guitar. So there I was helping out with the globe programming without even knowing it.
Chill.
Chill. Right.
Fortunately, not because of me, although I did try to expose him to Flat Earth and he wasn't taking it. He did change, there's no more globe in his logo, but not because of the Flat Earth revelation, but he just got bored of it. But I thought it was pretty cool, the vulture with the guitar, the rock on top of the globe. Boy, was I an idiot.
So now you're on episode 150 what of Flat Earth and Other Hot Potatoes?
Yeah, it's 1,050. No, I think it's 109, just as they say, in the can today. So.
Yeah, people still think I'm totally crazy. We took an Uber ride to Zoe's Kitchen earlier today, and the Uber driver asked me, well, what do you do? And I'm like, well, lately I'm a professional flat earther.
Oh, that's a
And
good one.
I went into the store, and he's like, "Well, wouldn't everyone just fall off?" Um, I was in the store, and he's like, "Okay, well, I'm not going to talk about it."
I got a really good comment today on one of my. I'm gonna have to put my glasses on to look it up and read it to you. It's exactly pertaining to what you said. But boy, we all do. We all get that fall off question coming our way on videos all the time. And even if you don't make videos, you get that. You get that kind of thing. But this was a person who randomly came to my channel. This isn't a person who watches the videos or anything like that. Let me see if I can find it.
Yeah, and there's so many, I'll tell you, there's so many experts on my videos, and they've never seen one of my videos. It's kind of weird.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. They just
Well,
come along and drop a comment bomb, and they're doing it to try to either, people say, oh, there's paid people who do that, or they're just being a jerk.
yeah. So whenever anybody says that to me about falling off, I like to just turn it, they're trying to put you on the defensive, so it's easier to put them on the defensive and say fall off where, and have them start to try to describe the where. Say, well, who said that there's an edge? Like when people say, wouldn't people just fall off the edge? Say, who says that there's an edge? And then have them respond to that.
Right, because everyone always goes to think, and this is something that I did right off the bat was, well, spinning. Everyone thinks spinning, it's got to be spinning. But, what I told them was stationary plane, right? So it goes right past people that, okay, wait a minute, stationary plane, not even spinning. Everyone reverts to spinning because that's sort of, ingrained into the subconscious with the whole spinning sphere model. But when, if you consider possibly the stars and the heavenly bodies as spinning and us as stationary, or even possibly just the electromagnetic field above us as spinning, then there's so many other possibilities, and we're not spinning at all. In fact, we've never moved a single yard.
Yeah, exactly. And Airy, the astronomer royal, proved that we weren't spinning. So you've got people very highly qualified in the sciences. And
I found
that was a failure. What, Patty?
I found a very highly qualified commenter who I've never seen comment on anything before, and I'll feel free to talk about this person only for the fact that I don't even think they're a real person. Their channel name is D4NK, but when you look at it, it spells out dank, and it's just this weird picture of a person that's not probably his real picture or her real picture. When you go, they've got no subscribers, and all it says under their picture is "kill yourself." Okay, so this is the comment they made on my video I did the other day with a Crow 777. He wrote, "This is the dumbest, most useless YouTube channel I ever saw. Flat Earth theory will die as soon as public space transport is available, hopefully, possibly in the future." I responded, "Tell you what, I'll buy you a ticket aboard the first public space transport ship, which will be taking off the first of never." So,
Nice.
that's akin to fall off the edge comments. Although I think people are nicer that make the fall off the edge comments. I think they've just seen those old pictures of ships and the edge, and that's just what they think.
There was the English novelist Terry Pratchett who wrote the Discworld novels, where he was showing the Hindu model, the flat disc on the top of 4 elephants on the top of a giant turtle. That was a model of his world, and he wrote a whole series, like 80-odd novels. In each novel, the introductory paragraphs were describing the shape of that Earth. So that was a disc with eternal waterfalls falling off the edges. So even if people haven't seen the old pictures of the ship falling off the edge, there's a lot of younger people who have read those stories that were later made into cartoon movies. So there's still a popular meme out there, a disc with water falling off the edges. And
yes, or people will say, oh, you believe the Earth's riding on the back of a turtle. You hear that sometimes.
And that was actually part of the belief system of one of the ancient Native American tribes, if I'm not mistaken, right? Or like some Mayans, they thought we lived on the back of a turtle or an alligator, and I'd believed that before I believed it. Believed it was a spinning sphere in outer space again, for sure. Um,
You know what? When you think about it that way, if you had all the belief systems lined up and you could just look at them on a graph or like right on your computer screen, the spinning ball looks just as crazy. Crazier even. I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
sure, there
it,
could be a
totally
turtle.
ridiculous.
It's
yeah, it doesn't.
possible.
The spinning ball doesn't even have legs.
Exactly.
Well, you mentioned earlier, Antonio, the Aries failure experiment. That was so important because they were trying to calculate, exactly how fast, either we're spinning in relation to the stars and vice versa. And what they found, or the evidence was in line with the fact that the Earth is stationary and it's just the starlight along with the ether moving.
Mhm.
But you never hear about this. They don't teach this in physics, and there were subsequent experiments. So many of them, the Michelson, Morley, and Gale experiments, Aries failure, several of them where they were intending to prove the Earth is spinning and the ether is essentially stationary. And Einstein went ahead and threw out the ether altogether. But at the end of the day, there's all this really good scientific evidence done by.
Sorry, guys.
No,
That
no
was.
worries. Yeah, all this really just solid scientific data that shows that we're stationary and it's the light that's moving. That's really, really important, but they don't teach that to theoretical physicists and astrophysicists, and that's sort of a shame, but it goes to show, I mean, it's a very good example of how the educational system is totally misleading people, and people should be really pissed about this, especially if they've spent $250,000 plus interest on their education and they're just being fed lies. So
Well, they have to. They're kind of forced. They're cornered into teaching the model they teach with the theories, because if they remained open to the idea of the ether, then they would be looking at the energies involving, associated with the ether and arriving at things like over unity. Whereas with the theory of relativity, the over unity is not possible because the ether is not there. So that conduit doesn't exist. So you have this theoretical nothingness from which energy cannot arrive. Well, nothingness is not something that exists from where energy could or could not come from, which is why when they describe the Big Bang Theory, they don't describe the nothingness at the start. They
well,
start
don't you think
far.
it's strange though that science and people have been really infatuated by lightning for a long time, thunder and lightning. Science does not have a cogent full explanation of how that works. And I mean, what do you think? What do y'all think? I mean, I think this is owing to the fact that they're not thinking of reality properly. And I think that there's a lot of answers to fundamental questions like that. What exactly is lightning? How does it work? That could be, really obvious in a flat Earth sort of paradigm. What do y'all think?
That's just, I think exactly the same. In fact, you have something similar with the thunder, the actual sound of thunder. What the heck? We're told it's water molecules from clouds clashing. Okay,
That
let's
sounds
replicate that.
ridiculous.
Yeah,
Right.
let's replicate that in a laboratory. You can't replicate it in a laboratory, which is why they never have done. We have a sound that's happening from an energy meeting another energy, causing the sound, and we have to have something for the sound to bounce down towards us from. Otherwise, it would just go up past the thinnest layers of the atmosphere and reach the point where they can no longer propagate because there's no air. So not just the lightning. I mean, the lightning is describing a phenomenon that Tesla was tapping into, but it requires the ether. Now, if you remove the ether from the equation, you're working on electricity and light, and not the vehicle that's allowing it to happen. So, because the atmosphere doesn't have the same qualities as the ether. So, the atmosphere is just what the lightning happens in, whereas
Yeah,
the
I've
ether is
I've
what
even
causes.
heard them I've even heard them go so far as to hypothesize that cosmic rays are at the root of thunder and lightning, and they just go so far off the deep end to sort of jumping through hoops to ensure that everything fits in with the spinning spherical Earth model. This infinite space model where there there's all these electromagnetic waves sort of going through all this infinitude of space, but I think that's all very much fabricated, theoretical, and folly.
Oh, absolutely, because what they always do is they remove the source to something external to the planet Earth, therefore something that we cannot tap into.
I
You
think
know?
it's God bowling, really. That's my scientific explanation.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
sometimes he gets a strike, and sometimes gutter ball.
Hey John, sorry Patricia. Hey
Yeah,
John, we have Robert Shortman.
I was going to say we gained a panel member. How you doing, Robert?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Wogga. How you doing?
Awesome, man. What you been up to?
Just on Patricia's show a little bit earlier. That was really good. Appreciated that. That was nice.
So nice to see you, Robert. It's been so long, like 10 minutes.
Yes, Robert and Patricia just finished the show on Patricia's the Flat Earth Under the Hot Potatoes. She was interviewing Robert, and he showed a whole bunch of photographs from Antarctica. It was awesome. It was really cool.
Oh, I'd love to see him, man. You still got him queued?
Yeah, they're all ready to go.
Yeah, go ahead. Let's see him. So you've actually been down there, huh?
Yeah, I'll pop them
I'll
up
just
there.
narrate the pictures since I know what they all are now. I'll
Sorry.
pretend I was there, although, yeah, I couldn't hack it, I don't think. I'd be one of those, Robert, who'd be there for a day and say, can I go back now?
Well, he's gonna quiz you after this one, so you really better pay attention and take
Uh-oh.
notes.
Okay.
Okay. Start with
Listen,
that.
guys, before you start, I'm sorry, but I'm gonna. This is just a very. I just wanted to come in and say, hey, make sure that I could say hi. But I'm gonna have to go because it's so late here in the UK, and I've only just managed to get my sleep back in order. So
Well, you need to get some sleep, get your sleep patterns back in order for sure, and
yeah,
And I have to go
whenever you feel
too,
good.
but my reason is not about sleep, though.
yeah, John, I was sleeping. I was going to sleep until recently. I was going to sleep at midday and waking up in the evening. So I was sleeping through the day, and oh man, it had been a couple of months like that, and it was starting to actually get me down. So I've just managed to yank myself back into a proper sleep state.
Yeah, you got to, man. You gotta have it regular patterns, or it'll throw off your balance, man, for sure.
Yeah.
So you do that. Take care of yourself.
Yeah, thanks, man. And I've got a video that I'm pulling out soon on Airy. A pretty interesting thing that I found on Airy of Airy's failure. I'll send you a link when I put the video, John. I'll pass you a link on Skype. Okay.
Awesome, man. Well, take care, and thanks for joining us. And we'll go ahead and pass it over to Robert. I'm dying to see these Antarctica pictures, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about what you did down there, and don't tell us anything where you have to go back and kill us later.
And I've got to go too, so I'll say goodbye for now and say that, John, I'll be having you on the Secret Hangout show Monday, and we will talk about all sorts of stuff.
Definitely. Thanks for coming,
Thanks.
Patty. See y'all later.
See you later.
See you later.
Bye.
Yeah, this is just one of the islands that I did a clean up, which was clearing all the rubbish away.
Awesome.
There's some amazing sights that you really can't put into words until you're there.
Oh, look at the penguins, huh?
Yeah, they're not too worried with the snow.
So how long were you down there in the Antarctic for?
The Antarctic in total about 16 months, 17 months in total, and then there's about a month I sat in between the two missions, the staying down there for the 13 months and then coming back and spending a month in the Falklands and then going back to the peninsula and spending many months clearing up all the rubbish, but on the way I get some good views.
And so you more or less stayed confined to the same pie slice of Antarctica in the globe Earth terms, or the same area, or were you pretty much
just the UK slice? Yep.
Yeah.
So
there's no sort of free roaming other than what your orders are, or
no, that's it. It was pretty much what your orders are, and you do what you do each day, and you're part of the ship's crew, so you clean up on the ship and take part of the duties similar to what you do in the base. It's almost like military, the way they run everything.
Are you familiar at all with the Iron Republic story? It was from the late 1800s, and it was published in 1902, I think. Essentially, this ship I believe he was coming from Great Britain, went south all the way down past the 90 degrees south latitude, and was going around trying to find a passage through, and found a passage through. Um, do you think that's possible? I mean, given what you've seen down there, if you were to go exploring and it was a
Yeah.
good summer with not a whole lot of ice cover, there may be some inlets that you could go beyond, or into.
Yeah, I mean, I'm literally standing on like 2 or 3 meters of ice below me there, so you can get close to it. And if you find the lead, which is just like a ramp up the ice, then you don't have to, you don't have to mountaineer up 200 feet of sheer ice.
Right. And I think it's so important because there's this huge misconception out there, at least this is the way that I've read it, that people state that flat Earth proponents claim that there is no Antarctic. And I think that that's ridiculous. And so it's
Yeah,
sort of good to see a level-headed flat earther who's been there. And so, we can point to that and say, no, that was never anything I've said, right?
No, I heard that as well, and it kind of annoyed me when I've been down there, and I was like, well, no, I believe in flat Earth, and I've clearly seen the evidence with my own eyes and facts on the internet and in reality, and then I've been there, so yes, it does exist, and you really have to sort out the nonsense when people say that, oh no, it doesn't exist, it's in your imagination. Well, no, it's not. It does exist, like the flat Earth exists.
Well, what's so interesting to me too is before, a few years ago, before I came into this truth about the Earth being a stationary plane, my sort of life research did take me into looking into the Antarctic, and there is sort of this mystery surrounding it. I was looking at things like the black hexagon in the Antarctic, and
Oh,
of
there's
course,
definitely weird things. I've even got a photo I can show you, which looks like a pyramid. And I recently, I keep an eye out on what
right.
propaganda they're putting
Then
out,
you've got
especially with.
characters like Richard C. Hoagland who take it to this whole bizarre level and say, yeah, there's the same thing on Jupiter too. And so it's just so weird how it's all sort of designed to lead you away from the truth. And
Yeah.
again, there is this big sort of question mark still looming, and we'll get back to the pictures, but this big sort of enigma looming around Antarctica, even in the conventional sort of circles. And so that's really sort of fascinating when it appears to me as if that there is some sort of big time military cover up to really keep us in the dark in terms of doing, a full 360 geodetic survey of the Antarctic. It's almost as if they gave that task to the United States Admiral Richard Byrd and sort of let him do it. And nobody's ever really concerned themselves with going back down there and verifying his claims and verifying, the maps. And well, sure, people go down there. But in terms of the military, like when you were down there, you're sort of confined to one area. There is no sort of massive geodetic survey going on. However, it's such a vast area, they could be 50 or 100 miles away doing whatever they want, and nobody would ever know it, right?
Exactly. I mean, they could, and if they had facilities or machines to tunnel in, then they could make a discreet entrance and have a whole complex under there, and you wouldn't even know. You wouldn't even
Yeah,
know about it.
absolutely. And well, and then of course you've got the whole going back to the Nazis. I remember that there were claims, because you've probably heard this claim too, that Hitler did not die in Germany. He lived to be an old man and died in like Argentina, along with a lot of the other, high up Nazi officers. And that's sort of fascinating that there is this connection to the Antarctic, even in those stories. And then you have these other offshoots of that idea where the Nazis had some sort of a secret base out there, and that sort of gets chilling if perhaps maybe they found their way, to another area.
Well,
like
I think
Barrington.
it could well have found their way to a new area, and if other countries had been aware of that as well, they would want their finger in that pie to get there and loot whatever resources or claim their part of their sovereignty in that area. That all countries would do that, and then they would say no one else is allowed here, it's just for us only because it contains this or that.
Right. Well, if you follow the stories, the people that are in these other areas don't want to be found because they know exactly how this sort of world or this culture works. The whole Iron Republic story, I don't know. I mean, I tend to like to believe it, but it's just I'm the type of person to where I have to knock on the wood or stick my finger in the hole sort of person, right?
Yeah.
Doubting Thomas, and that's just me. I'm a skeptic, and
I
so
think that's a good thing to be, because then you tend not to fall into any traps or any kind of laid out plans that people want to put on you and say this is exactly what it is, and you kind of take it at first value, which is not the way to be. You've got to kind of really.
yes, I say that very tongue in cheek. I'm a skeptical flat earther, but a skeptic nonetheless.
Yeah, you've got to be open-minded, because if things change or new data comes to light that we've found out, then we've got to be prepared to understand it and kind of go with it. Really, it's no point of just jumping at the first thing. The same as the
So,
maps. It's
did
the
you?
same as the maps, isn't it? We don't know exactly what it's shaped like, but we've got more of an idea than the rubbish that they feed us. So it's something to work on.
See, I guess going down to the Antarctic would be a totally different experience as a flat earther. Like I'd be constantly like monitoring the south and looking for other sunrises. I've seen some video evidence that isn't exactly conclusive, but it's sort of compelling, where you can see the obvious course of the sun behind you. So that would be towards the north. But then you see just a glimpse of maybe the outer edge of another sun's of another system's
That is the only one photo I've had to do that with.
periphery.
And the reason that is because this chap was is South African elite special force.
Okay, good. I'm glad I didn't see that then.
And it's all smudged out, yeah, on purpose.
Excellent.
I didn't show that in Patricia's show.
Great.
But yeah, there was a lot of specialized people down. I dealt with a lot of the Marines that were in the HMS Endurance, so that was a whole operation in itself, and that was flying fuel and stuff to the different locations.
Right, man. So
Pull out of that.
when you were down there, see, I've never even left the United States. So whenever I talk to people that have been abroad and been sort of, I guess you could say, exploring, everyone I've talked to is sort of the same thing. It's all very confined. When you're down there with the military, you're sort of limited in your capacity to travel and explore and do experiments and research.
Military ship there, yes, a military ship there.
To me, that would be an extremely important place, especially in a spinning sphere model, which becomes so preposterous when you actually go down there because, of course, if you're at the equator on a spinning sphere, then you're traveling east at 1,037.5 miles an hour, theoretically, right? And zipping around a curve, so you're vertically falling at like 135 miles an hour. Yes, I sat down and figured it up one day. So that would be an extremely volatile place. And you'd think that if you traveled to, close to the poles where you're spinning a lot more slowly, theoretically, then I don't know, maybe you'd experience things differently. But did you notice anything at all different, or was the Earth not spinning, or did it appear to be spinning differently than you're used to?
Exactly the same. Yep, exactly the same. Didn't feel anything different in that.
And and it's just so odd because it never dawns on us, does it?
No, it should be spinning slower there, so you'd feel it, wouldn't you, if you were used to one speed and then you suddenly went to the supposed south on the sphere.
And that's how powerful, I was talking about predictive programming earlier. That's how powerful that is, that it literally sort of allows us to disassociate with our eyes and our best instinct and our best judgment. And it allows us to totally shut ourselves off from reality, what is true and what is correct. But it's really powerful. And when you have this sort of paradigm that, we live on a spinning sphere, then again, we sort of jump through hoops to make that work for everything. Although subconsciously we don't realize we're doing that. I think that we really sort of have to. And we'll do a lot to keep our imagination sort of at ease with the way that we view the world, right?
I agree totally, yeah. I mean, we have to do it that way, I think. But
wow, that's awesome. I'm spacing out at the helicopter.
yeah, so that's a military helicopter. They're all military personnel. They're digging tents in locations, and then they would just drop in the fuel down, and then we'd haul the fuel over, load it onto the plane, and then fly the plane to the drilling depots.
Right. Yeah. I've always sort of thought of helicopters as a really good indicator of how stationary everything is. And you can't really use that argument in the South Pole because, well, yeah, the Earth's supposed to be orbiting the sun at 66,000 miles an hour. That's what we're told. And the spin really isn't so much of a factor down there. In fact, if you went all the way to the South Pole, you'd be spinning exactly half the speed as the hour hand on a clock.
Yeah.
And that disparity, I've mentioned this in a few videos, but the disparity between that and the equator should make things way, way differently at the pole compared to the equator, just because of the lack of centripetal force at the pole and the abundance of centripetal force at the equator. But no, there is a slight difference on a scale between the 2 points, and that's really in line with barometric pressure. Although in the South Pole, I believe things would weigh a little bit less than the North Pole, right? Because the barometric pressure is way lower down there. Did you guys do any sort of barometric readings or anything like that from time to time?
No, they didn't have really any instruments for that. We got the results from the BBC Weather Office.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
They
had a direct link to them, so they just kind of got the data from them, and they kind of check all around everywhere what the weather's doing. So, but I think they know more than they're telling on with what the weather's happening.
Right, and so you'd think that you guys would have your own sort of self-contained weather balloons and radars and that sort of thing. But so you're actually getting your weather piped in from London then?
That's it. Yeah, I mean they had weather things there and they had weather balloons, but they didn't seem to tell you what the weather was doing. It was told from London. Yeah.
Wow.
Huh. They didn't bother. Thinking of that, you'd have thought they'd have, some kind of radar system that would be able to track the weather. They had radar systems to do other things.
Now, in terms of communications, did you ever get too much into that side of it? Because, of course, globe earthers love to say, well, they're bouncing their communications off satellites. But I don't think that's the case.
I just think they've got powerful radio receivers that send out that signal, and then they've got the receiver in the phone or the thing at the other end. So yeah, they might be reflecting it off the ionospheric dome. Yeah,
it's so funny because people would tell me, yeah, ham radios used to be able to transmit just vast distances, like just ridiculous. And I always thought that they were either mistaken or misinformed, because at least me personally, I was brought up thinking that in order to send a radio transmission, say from the United States to Australia, you'd need a satellite, right? But in fact, these long-term or these long-range communications have been going on since long before there were satellites, and I really think this goes back into looking at the world from a sort of a Tesla coil or a large capacitor plate point of view. That it would be fairly easy to sort of piggyback on those existing electromagnetic flux lines or the electromagnetic fields generated by the Earth itself. And when you think of it that way, it really makes a lot of sense how long-range communication will work without satellites. It's just, to me, it's amazing how they've
on a flat plane. It does make sense now. It does make sense when you think about the radars. How it would work and how it would reflect off the dome.
Right, and I think of the dome as being more subjective. Like if you really study high altitude weather balloon footage, there's sort of this equidistant circle around the observer up there that reflects everything back to you. And down towards the ground, it looks like blue sky and clouds. But up towards space, it's just black, right? Especially if it's daytime, you don't see any stars, even though space is totally black. Now, when it's nighttime, launching weather balloons in the United States is illegal, so we don't have too many of those. But it's really interesting because the parallax changes, the perspective changes, and you can see the sun when you shouldn't be able to see it. It should be on the other side of the Earth. It's just sort of sitting there, locally hovering above like we always see it. And I've seen weather balloon footage before as a globe earther, and never really sat down and figured out, well, that sun looks awfully close, and by God, there's a hot spot, right? It's just that we don't make those connections until we're open to this, and then you just see it everywhere. It's so blatant and obvious. It's sort of ridiculous.
I mean, even with the high altitude jump that chap did, I can't think of his name.
Felix Baumgartner, the Red Bull jump,
That's it. I mean,
137,000 feet.
They managed to splice the frame in when they had the standard camera, and you got a split second or so of it flat horizon as he was opening the door, and then the rest of it was GoPro fisheye kind of.
Yep.
Lens.
Totally fisheye, and it's the same thing that NASA's been doing for a long time. I remember going down to when I lived in Florida, it was either at Universal Studios or one of the theme parks where you get into this ride and it shows you on a big, huge, like before they had IMAX, it was sort of like that, like a planetarium sort of thing. And they show you the rocket taking off as if you're in the rocket looking down. And I always remember, even as a kid, that they would cut that. And I was like, why do they always cut that right there? And it never dawned on me that it was just fake. They were faking it with a fisheye lens.
Same here. I mean, the thing that aggravates me when I see it now is when they're taking off in planes and jets and that kind of thing, and they're doing their high altitude, but they're actually a few hundred feet off the ground, and it's like fisheye at that height,
Oh yeah, but of course, if you watch any sort of and there's lots of good high altitude weather balloon footage out there where they don't use a fisheye lens.
Yeah.
It's just amazing. And, people like Dr. Robotham wrote Zetetic Astronomy in the mid 1800s. They were getting up in, hot air balloons and getting up a couple, maybe 2 or 3 miles at the most. And they would even remark, they weren't finding any curvature, and they were extremely skeptical about this. And to me, that's really important because, globe earthers have this argument where they feel very comfortable saying that flat Earth is this sort of bizarre, outdated perspective from 500 years ago, but you realize that's really not true. And there were really, really smart people.
And then throw the science back in their face and say, "Well, look, it clearly doesn't match up with what you're presenting." So it is what it is, not what you're saying.
What I started the show on, Robert, was just sort of a little diatribe that I worked on for a little while about lightning and how regular, typical, conventional science, modern physics, doesn't have a complete, cogent explanation for lightning and thunder, the whole phenomenon. They've got some good guesses and they think they understand how it works, but I think that this is a result of them trying to cram or jump through the necessary hoops to make sure that everything is neat and tidy in the spherical spinning Earth model. But lightning and thunder and these sort of things seem extremely natural to me from a flat Earth perspective, or even like Tesla's perspective. I tried to find this quote from Tesla. It's a really good quote where he likens the world to a giant Tesla coil or a capacitor plate, and the ionosphere as the other plate or the negative charge to complete the connection. And to me, that makes a lot of sense, and things like lightning and thunder would make a lot of sense if only we could get our scientific minds and the guys with the equipment and all the computer program, the software that's dedicated to studying lightning and that sort of thing, to think about this a little differently.
That's interesting. I mean, what do you think of the Carrington event then that happened in the 1800s? Yeah.
Maybe you could describe it a little bit. I may not be familiar.
The event was when they kind of just got to the stage of telegraph poles and receivers at each end, and perhaps controllers. And what happened was there was a supposed flare from the sun that caused auroras all around the plane or the world, that they said. And with the result of that, there was a back current feed from the ground that caused all these places to actually catch on fire, and telegraph poles to catch alight. And I think could that be a globalist lie that they're pushing out, and this was just an event that did happen, but it was nothing to do with the sun, and it was more to do with what you're saying, like a Tesla coil Earth type of thing, and perhaps an overload or some type of.
Yeah, they may have not had everything grounded out properly. I'm not really sure, but it's a really good point that any piece of equipment, or say the ISS, the International Space Station, anything like that uses up electricity has to be grounded out. And even airplanes, they'll do this. They'll store up a static charge, and then as soon as they land, they ground out, and so that static charge is released. But they have to ground out. You have to release that static charge, or what you get is an overload.
Yep.
And that may have been. Yeah, that may have been what happened in that situation. I'm not familiar with the event, but that's one really excellent argument or proof that the ISS isn't even up there. Is the fact that even if they could somehow get it up there and get it in the thermosphere that supposedly fluxes from many hundreds of degrees plus in the daylight to many hundreds of degrees minus in the nighttime.
Yeah.
But then, of course, there's this whole debate in terms of, well, what is temperature in the thermosphere? And so, because the molecules are so spread out. But at the end of the day, the ISS couldn't possibly be up there for 15 years and never ground out. They'd be fried up there just from the static charge buildup alone. And NASA doesn't have any sort of explanation or technology in terms of how they do this. And it's a really big problem. It's yet another problem with NASA.
Plasma, wouldn't it? It would be plasma and electrostatic that would be so high it would end up, you wouldn't be able to do anything near it or have anything go near it, because it would just explode by the arcing that would happen between the two objects that are going towards each other. Because as soon as something went near it, so just say for their picture, of something docking, how would it dock if they've got two different potential charges and that thing's clamping on? You'd get a massive bout across from the station to the object, wouldn't you?
Right, yeah. I mean, because that static charge would be needing to go somewhere.
Yes.
And there's just so many problems with the ISS. You've got there's other issues with the inertia of the thing. I mean, some of the capsules and different parts of it are just connected by like a single arm and a single bolt, right?
But the sheer force of it just kind of going round and it having these exerting things on it over that 15 years, it would be in bits now. What it is it's in an enclosed pool. That's why they can.
Well, let me ask you a question though. Here's another thing too. You were in the Navy.
No, I wasn't. I was in the in Bassett. I mean, it worked closely with the military.
Well, you were on a ship.
Yeah. Yeah. I was on it for about 3 months. So yeah,
you guys would have. I'm sure that you would have some sort of protocol or rules in place for keeping the doors shut or the hatches closed.
Yeah, all the time.
That's sort of when you're out at sea or out in any sort of hostile environment that you want to keep out, especially if you're talking about infinite space, a vacuum that's going to suck everything out in about, I don't know, a minute. If they would just keep all their hatches closed, that wouldn't be an issue. But
you would have to. I mean, even in a ship that I was in, you rough weather, everything was battened down. You weren't allowed out, and then that was it. You couldn't just do it like they do it and have all the hatches wide open.
Yeah, you can watch NASA. You can watch NASA footage.
That would be it. Everything would be sucked out that second, and
for hundreds of hours. You can watch them for hundreds of hours up there in the ISS. They never close the hatch behind them, and really, like, I'd be a nervous wreck up there. I'd be like, dude, you guys have to close these hatches, because if one tiny little pebble hits the side of this thing, we're all going to be sucked out, and then we're all going to die. No, they just don't even care.
My suit, looking at you in my suit, thinking, yeah, I agree with you. I wouldn't take it off.
Yeah, right. And it's just so laughable because even from last year, I sort of I've been plugging the crap out of Cleo Loy, because she sort of did this was out at University of Sydney, Australia. She took the Murchison telescope. It's like a radio telescope array that covers a few square kilometers or whatever, but set it up in a binocular fashion so as to image in 3D. And she focused it about, I think it's 600 kilometers up, 350 miles up or something like that.
Wow.
And found in the lower magnetosphere these plasma tubes. And these plasma tubes are obviously going to be, charged gases. I did a little bit of research into different types of plasma. And one of the types it could be, notice I said could be, is is electromagnetic fusion plasma. And if that's the case, it could be, millions of degrees hot. However, of course, the Apollo astronauts back in the late 60s, early 70s, they did all these missions
They went
through
straight
and
through
back.
that, yeah, no problem.
Never heard of any of this stuff. Even the so-called Van Allen radiation belts were still sort of new and being debated. And
That's it. The radiation was so high, and they didn't, their hair didn't fall out or anything. It's amazing. It was amazing.
right. But then, of course, today you've got NASA showcasing things like Gemini, which is testing and trying to figure out how to get equipment and people through that hostile region of space. And I believe that's a direct quote.
Yeah.
And is that NASA admitting that they never went? The Apollo missions were fake, because I was on to the moon landings 5 years ago, right?
Yeah, I was on to them before Flat Earth, and I was well aware of it before Flat Earth. I was like, well,
Right. And
why
the
would they do
motive,
that? And
the motive's clear. It's like, okay, they wanted to, because JFK made a promise and they had to fulfill the promise for JFK, right? So they faked it. Well, I don't think so. He may have planned it, and maybe he was just as snowed as everyone else. I think that was probably the case.
Yep.
Because you got to remember, they've been cranking out things like Lost in Space and sci-fi, infinite space propaganda for decades and decades, back into the 50s. And so to me, that was sort of a natural outcome of growing up in that sort of culture, is to have real affinity for space exploration. I mean, that's almost as American as apple pie anymore.
Yeah, I mean they are up in their mark, in the UK at the moment. Last week actually this week they had an article in the Guardian kind of mocking Flat Earth and mentioning, various people.
Oh, it's great though. They're really shooting
yeah.
themselves in the foot.
And then they're going on to say, well, there could be aliens and this kind of thing coming from people in, parliaments in Europe and that type of thing. It's like, so yeah, that's hand in hand. That kind of says Flat Earth, load of rubbish, and space is real. Look, there's aliens. It's another way of them wheeling out something new that's going to grab everyone's attention and distract everyone from what is actually happening, which is people becoming more aware of what we're not living in than what we are.
Right. Yeah. Like I mentioned this the other day, but there was a follow-up done to it, so I'll mention it again. But Stephen Hawking's, everybody knows Stephen Hawking's. Somehow he did a documentary piece on a 3.1 mile laser test. And according to him, there was 6 feet of downward curvature over 3.1 miles. Then a flat earther on YouTube, Dr. Zach, was covering. They're doing a follow-up. They've done a pre-test, and there was 0. And what it seemed like the Stephen Hawking team did is they had some really sort of ditzy actors doing the experiment, and it was almost as if they didn't level off the laser. They had it sort of pointed down at a very slight angle towards the water, so that when that laser beam would hit the water at, say, a mile out, then it was reflecting sort of up at a steeper angle out towards the boat, and that's why it appeared to have raised 6 feet. But even according to the spherical trigonometry, over just 3.1 miles, there should only be, like 72 inches of curvature or something like that. And so I would, it was a really sort of a short, well-done little laser test documentary. Again, it's Dr. Zach. But I thought that it was really good because they debunked Stephen Hawking, and their preliminary test showed that there wasn't any sort of curvature over, 3.1 miles.
I've done it myself this year. I mean, I did it with a boat and a camera.
Right, and I was going to say it's no surprise to us because we've been measuring and looking for curvature, and I say we collectively, but the flat earthers out there have been measuring and trying to detect this curvature over many miles, and even just go back and read Zetetic astronomy from the mid 1800s, and they were picking out lighthouses that should not have been visible from 50, 60, 70 miles away. So yeah, it's no surprise. I mean, if there's 0 curvature over 70 miles, I'm not surprised there's no curvature over 3.1 miles. But it's really funny how
it's a nice test you can do though, and if you got like a bit of flat water that extends that distance, then you can do that. Everyone can do that test for themselves. They only need one person at one end and one at the other with a P900 or.
Right. Yeah. Well, and laser light does bend. there is going to be some degree of atmospheric refraction, but the fact that Stephen Hawking, who's sort of touted as this genius, would even put that on his show to show 6 feet of curvature over that short a distance. And so that's why I say they really do shoot themselves in the foot trying to do this, because anybody that even thought about that for a second would be like, wow, 6 feet. So how did, like, don't you think your eye would pick up on that? Our eyes are really good instruments to judge straight lines versus curved lines.
Yeah.
And we can clearly see that there is not this vertical droppage over 3 miles or 10 miles or any mile, regardless, even 60 miles, we're not finding that curvature. And so that's really why, it's that sort of solid physical empirical evidence that has led me and many, many others to this conclusion. But it's frustrating because people don't want to look at it. People think it's stupid. And then, you've got people even going down to Antarctica, taking pictures, and don't think, I never would have thought, well, the spinning doesn't seem that much different here.
No, you're right.
Yeah.
It's interesting to see how people's minds are, and they really are dumbed down, aren't they? A lot of the time, and I don't think there's a lot of people that will wake up to it. And they're the type of people that still believe 9/11 and everything else. There's what the government's told them.
Right.
There's a big batch of people that will wake up, though. This is it. There's a huge amount, and that's why they're doing what they're doing, to ensure that section of the population doesn't suddenly start to think, hang on a minute, maybe this chap's actually saying something that makes sense, and then they look into it, do the research, and actually check evidence for themselves. So they're not just taking one person's word for it. They're actually thinking for themselves and looking at lots of different sources, and then going with their instincts of what they're seeing physically in reality, not what someone's telling them.
Well, and here's a bunch of crap. ODD TV got shut down last week, and ODD TV just recently, within the last few months, he had a really big YouTube following, and he was hitting all the conspiracy stuff, and he just recently started looking at flat Earth, and agreed that there's something to this, and so they shut him down. And that's a little scary.
It is. I mean, I've had things delete off my search on Google, because obviously I went down to the Antarctic, and it links when you type Robert Shortman in Bass in the Google search. It come up with the web diary, but it also used to come up with the winter picture as well when I was there, and that's been taken down by Google. So they're starting to erase things.
Yeah, they're censoring.
Luckily, I've got such a bag load of pictures. If they did anything, then it would be out everywhere in one go, the whole lot in one flash. So they don't.
Well, and
the thing act in the background and do things gradually, incrementally, so you don't kind of notice it. But I notice things when they change.
When I get censored, I really get sort of fired up, and so that's another reason why I say that they shoot themselves in the foot. The whole Globe Earth team, I guess you could say.
That's why they do it very gradually, so you don't feel like you need to react so much. And if they do it bit by bit, you think a little bit here, a little bit there, not noticed. But I'm well aware of what they.
Well, like for example, when I was on the Art Bell show, and I did that debate with the doctor from Harvard, I got some flack for that because the debate really was sort of controlled and not in my favor.
Yeah.
But I did a remix of it and just sort of hit the really important points where the doctor obviously didn't have an answer, and there is something to this, obviously. So I was very confident about it. But they hit me with the copyright strike, and they claimed that was their material, even though I attended the show freely. It was my voice. I didn't sign any waivers of my rights to the material away, and they still hit me with that. And for about 3 weeks, I was like, well, I'm not going to do a copyright strike because I have to give them my address, and I didn't necessarily want to do that. So what I did is I shared that video on Google Drive with a ton of people and told them, you can upload this. And some people took some copyright strikes doing that. But it made it so that I wasn't the only one posting it. And I went ahead and did the copyright strike, and it was lifted. But that's what I mean. It's like it pissed me off that they were going to try to censor me, by essentially abusing YouTube's automated systems, and that's what they did. And so in pissing me off, they made the problem worse.
That's it. That's probably why they haven't shut me down or done anything. Because if I suddenly just went off there, it would just prove everything, and then everything that I said previously to everybody else that's known and seen me and listened and on all the other shows, it would just added a huge amount of validity to it, and that would have shot them in the foot completely.
Yeah, definitely.
So by ignoring it and then just mocking things with flat Earth, it ridiculizes the whole thing, and then you think, it's just nonsense. He's talking, he's mad. He's lost it. So they don't mention it and they don't do anything to upset the wrong people, because they know that if they did, it would just backlash them a lot harder. So they just kind of work in the background and do these little divisive things.
Yeah. Now, but before you popped in, we had mentioned, let's see here. We had talked about the lightning, but okay. Subliminal programming. No, there was something else. We'll get back to that. Coriolis effect. That's something that people just pull out of their butt. When you try to tell them, no, there's really an explanation for pretty much everything that you think proves the Earth to be a sphere. I mean, really anything that I would have thought of. I've already ticked off my list, but something that sort of people just sort of pull out of their rear is this Coriolis effect. And the reason being is we see the opposing rotation of cyclones in the northern hemisphere versus the southern hemisphere, or so that's the claim. That's how the claim goes. But in fact, it appears that especially in a flat Earth model, that this
the way the wind is going above it.
Well, right. It's according to where the sun is, and it's passed from Capricorn to Cancer. So that middle point between the two, counterclockwise and clockwise rotations of cyclones is not fixed at the equator, but instead sort of travels along with the sun. And that makes a lot of sense. If you think of the area where the sun is rising, say you're south of the equator at Capricorn in the southern summer, that area is going to be sort of perturbed and aggravated and heated up by the sun at a little bit more of a direct angle than the areas north. And so you've got, run your hand through a bathtub full of water, or run an oar of a canoe through the water, and you see this sort of opposing rotations of cyclones just from doing that. Yeah. And that's what I sort of see the sun and even the moon doing, is heating up and then cooling the atmosphere and the waters. And, this could even have something to do with the tides as well. But just that constant perturbation going in a, looking down from top in a clockwise motion.
There is that interference between, there must be some type of energy field or something that's causing that to tides, everything changing at those points.
Yeah, I really think it. I think it is
complicated, and more complicated than I think we can imagine to start with, because we're just realizing the base of what it is rather than how it is and how it is made and how complicated it is. I think that's it's a wonderful thing that we can think about, because there's many options of what it could be, but there's certainly something to it.
Right, and it's like we can see the sun coming up, and we think we know what the sun is, but I really don't. I think we have no clue what the sun is, and that's that's okay. We don't have to make things up and say, well, it's atomic fission. Atomic fission is just theoretical, or fusion, or whatever. It's theoretical. It's never been demonstrated. You can't reproduce it in a lab. And so to say that that's what the sun is and that's what the stars are, that's just extremely premature. Even if they get different, I guess, light readings, there's sort of like the Doppler effect with sound waves. There's a Doppler effect with light waves or electromagnetic waves. And that's how they claim to know that the sun is mostly helium and hydrogen. I just find that really, not helium and hydrogen. Yeah, helium and hydrogen.
They really limit science, and they do it on purpose again, so we don't really know the real ins and outs of what is happening.
Yeah, they have no idea. They're not going to go and scoop up a chunk of the sun and test it and say, yep, we were right. It's never going to happen. So they're very safe in this cocoon of theory.
The best experiment I've seen is this thing called the Keeley experiment, and what that is just a pure mechanical device. There's no electric. What it is integral design is water, that's part of what makes it run, and it creates like a water hammer compression effect that shunts this pistons, which turns the wheel. And the reverse effect of what it does is it creates this vacuum chamber that compresses the water again and negatively charges it, and the compression of that creates microwaves. That's
Yeah.
just pure water on its own, and that's a device that was in this museum that they kind of shunned and said it was rubbish and it didn't really do it. But it's no different to all the other patents that are thousands of free energy, this and that was sat in the offices that they're governing and controlling.
Well, and it's a shame because I really think that the Earth itself is sort of this massive free energy device. I mean, it's really unlimited capacity, and there really are. I mean, it appears that there are ways to tap into this. We don't have to be burning, fossil fuels. We don't have to be burning coal. We don't have to resort or revert to nuclear
There's
power.
an absolute huge amount of things that they could do that would save vast amounts of energy to the point where we wouldn't be using any energy.
Right, just pull it straight out of the ether. Oh, and that's what we had talked about before you had popped in was Aries failure. I don't know if maybe you wanted to touch on that a little bit, but of course, Aries failure was an experiment done by a royal astronomer, Airy, and it was to essentially he wanted to calculate, how fast the Earth was moving or spinning in relation to the ether. But the experiments, without getting into all the details, showed that the Earth was stationary and it was the ether or the light that was spinning. And it's just sad because you don't see these sort of revelations in the physics textbooks. And
Other than the NASA publications that mention that it's a flat, stationary, non-rotating object, for testing their aircraft, they mention it then, but that's the only time they mention it.
right, well, and even practical applications
and
of
they also put a caveat in and put a second line, so we also got a calculation for the sphere as well. But really, the summary of the whole document is quite extensive. The summary says it all, and that's a flat, non-rotating.
well, I'll tell
plane.
you, the ancient Romans definitely knew that it was a plane, because if you look at I was just sort of stumbled on this over the weekend, so it's really interesting. The ancient Romans had these miles and miles long aqueducts that they just spent. They really didn't spend that much time, but they just had such well-controlled brute force manpower, and their engineers knew how to build things with the arches to save on material and give it structural support. But it's just like hundreds of miles through mountains and valleys, and keeping a perfectly 3 inches per mile downgrade on these aqueducts that are sort of elevated on these huge platforms built out of stone. And from the top of the mountain right to Rome, they had them coming from all different directions in a perfect grade. Now, if the Earth was a sphere, just think of what sort of spherical trigonometry they would have had to do in order to get that grade right. But they didn't. That idea never even crossed their mind, and yet they got it so perfect that many of the ancient Roman aqueducts are still in full use today. And so that's really sort of amazing that we can get that sort of permanency with modern engineering.
I think
But
even ancient stuff, the pyramids line up with the stars and lights in the sky.
Right, yeah.
That's not changed. How
Yeah.
long have they been there? Longer than
Oh
this.
man, I never could understand that from a heliocentric point of view, because I was fully indoctrinated. I mean, I believed that the sun
They
was
said it was
around the
aliens, but no,
galaxy.
it's not. It's just the fact that they thought, oh look, that's what we're looking at now. Whether it's 3,000 or 10,000, however old it is, we don't know. But the design of it and the whole map, not just the 3 pyramids that line up with the Orion belt, we're talking that the whole network of it's about 50, 100 miles square, and there's various locations of all these tombs and thing, and it all maps out to make a star map of the sky above.
Yeah, it's chilling. I tend to respect ancient cultures a lot more, and a lot more than I used to, and I really think that it goes back to this whole, at least for me personally, it goes back to this whole idea that, we've figured this out and we know that, there's really nothing special about our world. And all these people were just so naive to think that there was anything special about them or what their plans were or what,
That's right. It makes us all feel insignificant, and then
it really does.
you
But,
just set in that mindset then of fear and something's going to smash into the planet, anytime, any day.
yeah, but when you now looking back at them, it's like, these guys, these cultures, these ancient cultures really had a lot figured out. And
Yes,
so
they did.
maybe we can learn something from them, but unfortunately it's really hard to do, from the whole standpoint of evolution and
What we're given through
heliocentric
information,
space.
yeah, because we're limited with the information, and unless you're again going out and physically getting it, you can only take it from the sources that you can find, and that's where they've got the control in it, and that's the
Well, it sure is, and I wonder what lengths they had to go to really suppress the Zetetic movement after Robotham, because there was a lot of people that were really, sort of diehard flat earthers and agreed, with me and probably
It
with
might be
you.
worth I might have to check the history time out of what they said and how locate, if anything event-wise happened after that to cause a big distraction from that, because it seems to be through various chunks of time that they, it comes up and then it gets kind of it diminishes and people forget about it, or something else happens and then that event's ignored. But I think it's gained too much momentum now for that to happen. Luckily.
Right, and I think that's really owing to the internet. I see it as sort of a double-edged sword.
It is. It's
Because
stabbed
we
them
can
back because they thought, oh, we can control it, but yeah, we can, and we can also get the information out as well.
Right, we can reach so many more people, but at the same time, it's almost as if our physical bonds, where the bonds really matter and are lasting, are sort of atrophying.
This is why I'm meeting with local people for the UK flat earthers, and we meet up and do the experiments, do the tests, and then,
Well, the culture had to change a little bit. People honestly weren't ready for this a year ago, but I just see so many people that are sort of popping off and waking up to this, that it really is a good time to where, there's so many resources online, on YouTube. There's websites. IFRS is still pretty good, where you can just get a ton of really good information on this. Whereas before, you had entities like the Flat Earth Society, who were sort of put in place to, make half-hearted arguments for the flat Earth theory, but then, sort of laugh at it and joke about it and come up with really ridiculous things like, gravity is caused by the Earth accelerating upwards at 9.8 meters per second squared. And of course, that's just ridiculous, but that's the sort of things that they'll insert into the, into their model in order to make people that are sort of researching this half-heartedly think that it's
actually trying to do something real, think, oh, well, is it really worth it, with this kind of
right. And it works. That works, but it's not going to work anymore, because there's really a good number of people that are awake to the good points. We don't have to have theories of gravity. We don't have to have theories of space-time or dark matter. None of that's necessary.
I believe if we get up in groups around, in each countries and actually start doing this is what's going to forge a lot stronger bonds with everyone, not just one person. When I met the people I met on the last event, it was, I gained friends I wish I'd had 30 years ago.
Right. Yeah, I'm thinking about coordinating something.
You never regret it. It's probably one of the best things I've done, gone to the Oxford one and the last event, which was recreating the Robotham experiment, and we did it slightly different. We were elevated at one end, but even that elevation, we took into consideration the height difference at the 5.5, 6 miles, and we still shouldn't have seen the thing where it was, which was a canoe.
Well, and see, the thing about water is, though, it's going to find its level. So regardless of how high up or down low one side of it is, if that water is not flowing, then it's level.
And the next one we're going to do will be, another Samuel Robotham experiment, but it's the one that's over 10 miles, and over that distance you shouldn't see a flag at each end. You should basically see it diminish in size from the distance, because it should be on a curve, so in between the middle of them 2 points That's how you can determine it. So they're going to have cameras fixed at each end and then do the experiment. And yeah, it's on the 23rd of July, Saturday. So
Awesome.
it's, yeah, going to go down and catch up with everybody and see some new people, and then get the experiments done and come away with more friends and an actual fact of doing something and physically getting to know people. That's the thing, because then it defeats them of their type of you know, anti-humanism, transhumanism, stuck on a machine, plugged into a machine. It pulls away from that, and then you physically engaging people how you meant to.
Yeah, I really do see this as something that changes people.
And then then everything else after that, YouTube and Facebook, all reinforces what you're doing and what you're aiming
Right.
for. Yeah.
Well, what I mean, like when I first started looking at this, there wasn't a whole lot to fall back on. I mean, there's a ton of good information, and we're finding more and more each day, but it takes a lot of people. I mean, and I'm sure that there's a million more, discoveries and flat Earth proofs that none of us has ever thought of.
Totally. And
But it
it's
really
getting these
takes
new
different
people
strokes.
into, yeah, new people in and new minds and people that have got all these clues, and people that have done things that we wouldn't have dreamed of, but come forward with the facts that prove something completely new, and then think, wow, that's fantastic. And the only way we can ever reach out to people, I think, is beyond YouTube and beyond chat, and it's doing it physically
Right.
to the same level you do on YouTube, and get on, and yeah, it's the way forward, I think.
So now lightning doesn't have a good explanation in the globe Earth model. Volcanic activity, people say volcanic activity and tectonic plate movement are only possible if the Earth is a spinning sphere. And I think that's really preposterous. First of
I
all,
just think it's part of the heating and cooling system of the plane we live on. So it has,
right. I mean, if you look at the conventional narrative, they have this whole theory of Pangea, the supercontinent, where all the continents were sort of locked into one big giant continent, and over time they've spread out and spread out all over the globe. But really, I mean, if you look at this from like a physical laws standpoint, all of the more dense land masses should have wound up as sort of a strip along the equator, because that's where the centripetal force would be the greatest, or centrifugal
that's
force
it. No,
would be the greatest.
they went evenly everywhere. It's amazing how that did that.
Right. That doesn't make any sense
Not at all.
whatsoever.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever in a spinning sphere Earth model,
It-
but in a flat Earth model, it actually makes sense. If the continents are moving relative to one another, that's fine. The Earth is still stationary, and you don't have this problem of creating a spinning ball wrapped around lava. I mean, how does that work, right? Like, how do you physically wrap everybody around a ball made of lava?
no,
And that's
yeah,
that's what the globe is supposed to be. But I think maybe we definitely have volcanoes, so we know that there is lava down there.
yeah.
We may have tectonic plate movement. There seems to be good evidence for that, but I think it's way more extrapolation than there is scientific proof of anything. It's sort of theory, right? I mean, nobody was back around. How many millions of years ago did they say the Pangea was
Do
around?
you know
Nobody
if
was around
anybody
back then.
Do you know if anybody has plotted the Ring of Fire on a flat Earth map to see what that looks like?
The Ring of Fire.
Yeah, all the volcanoes around the supposed globe that forms a ring. How does that ring look on a flat Earth map? Or
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I'm not sure, but there are a lot of volcanoes popping off, huh? Yeah, that's interesting. Um, I hadn't really studied the Ring of Fire, but I know I've been sort of following. There's been an uptick in. There's two of you now.
I don't know how I've done that. It kicked me out,
That
it
was
kicked
fine.
me out, and then I got flung straight back in.
Yeah, yeah. No, you're good.
I'm
There's
gonna have
been
to drop off now because it's super late and I have work
okay.
tomorrow. But thank you ever so much for the invite. It's been a really eye-opening chat, and I appreciate coming onto your show.
Oh yeah, man. Good to have you, and we'll see you maybe next week or over the weekend, whenever you can make
Yeah,
it.
lovely. Thank you. Take care, Morgal, and speak to you all soon. All the
All right,
best.
man. We'll take it
Bye
easy.
bye. You too.
And
Bye bye.
yeah, I'll
See you soon.
probably hang on here for just a few minutes and finish out a couple of thoughts, but I know we had Kristen Wolf on earlier, and I guess her computer overheated again. Somebody needs to get that girl a cooling pad for Christmas. Uh, no, so what I'll
Awesome.
do is, it's pretty late here as well, and what I'll probably do is just go ahead and wrap this show up a little bit early tonight. We covered a lot. We had a great time. We had a great show. Thanks everybody out there for joining us. Just remember that this show and this channel is viewer and listener sponsored. So if you want to support the channel, you can do so through fan funding on YouTube or directly through PayPal to jonelance@gmail.com. Other than that, what I'll do is I'll just end this on the same note that I started it. There weren't too many people around when I started it, so I'll just go ahead and read through this again and I'll wrap it up. So growing up in Florida, I thought it was sort of odd from a heliocentric perspective that any one state or any particular area would be the so-called lightning capital of the country or possibly the lightning capital of the world. I just didn't really, it sort of perplexed me, or I was confounded as to how any one location would be more or less prone to lightning than any other, given the Earth being a spinning sphere. And of course, there is no real, true, full, cogent explanation for the phenomenon of thunder and lightning in the heliocentric spinning sphere Earth model. Considering the stationary Earth model, lightning actually begins to make some sense to me. Especially if we think of the world as essentially a perfectly balanced plane with a high capacity of charge, or as a giant sort of capacitor plate, as Nikola Tesla put it. And this capacitor plate would be enveloped in an enormous electromagnetic field generated by an electromagnetic vortex in the central north. Now, there are obviously other flat Earth models than the central north model. But until we're able to really explore the outskirts of the sun's visible path, south of the 90-degree south latitude or north of the 90-degree north, we'll never really have all answers to all these questions. Could you imagine if our forebears would have spent a gazillion dollars exploring the world and the oceans as opposed to faking space to trick us? How many answers would we have to these sort of questions? And I think we'd have a lot.
That's probably why they say they know more about space than they do the ocean, because they lie about space and they don't know nothing about the ocean.
Right, exactly. There's places on the ocean floor that have never been mapped or even, traveled to or anything. And of course, instead of exploration and real pioneering, we get cheap beef film reels and cartoons and CGI, like the Apollo missions in the 60s and the Pioneer 10 missions to Jupiter in the 70s. I'm certain that, and that was just a satellite, not a manned mission to Jupiter, of course. I'm certain that whatever's beyond the sun's visible path, either south of the 90-degree south or north of the 90-degree north, the powers in charge of the world militaries found it a large enough threat to the status quo that they pulled out and set up boundaries along with keep out signs in the Antarctic. They'll never willingly admit to decades of lies and stealing our money, so we'll continue to get cheap B film reels from NASA. And the majority of people will believe that it's real and snub their nose at anyone trying to tell them it's fake, cartoons, and now CGI. Hollywood does a better job faking space than NASA, and I really think that that's by design. I think NASA deliberately makes their space footage, sort of choppy and grainy and B-reel because they don't want to get too grandiose in the fakery. That's why I believe they don't show you the stars or landmarks on the ground from the ISS live. Although you'd think after all these years up there in the thermosphere, as they allege, that they'd have strapped a camera to the top of the ISS looking out into space. But they never show you anything but clouds and water, clouds and water, nondescript deserts, more clouds and more water. NASA doesn't really even need to make their images appear realistic, nor do the other so-called space agencies. We got
so much footage, they keep rerunning it. And they've done that before. They did that with the Soho things I spotted out about a couple of weeks ago.
right.
Same rerun of image over a 4-year period, because I was capturing it on my iPad and just doing a screen capture.
Or I think it was the Japanese had the images of, maybe it was NASA it was like supposedly 1 million miles away, and it shows the Earth and then the dark side of the moon as a full moon. And that's really neat and all, but it looks like a South Park episode. That's how bad it is. And if you randomly ask people, you know, do you think this is real footage of the moon from space or CGI? They'll tell you it doesn't even look like CGI. It looks like really like an episode of South Park. That's how bad it is. But you know, again, I don't think that NASA wants to get too technically particular in their fakery. They don't want to show you stars because they'd have to answer for, you know, the lack of accuracy in terms of what the stars should be doing.
They wouldn't be able to do it, and you'd be able to spot it out and say, oh, that's located over that at that angle. Hang on, I'm looking up now at that angle, and it doesn't match up at all with where they're meant to be positioned. So they can't do that. They have to keep it simple, so it keeps the lie simple.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And people just don't second guess the spherical Earth pictures and animations because there's no reason to. And unless people or, you know, the one is unplugged and deprogrammed from this sort of terrible and silly lie, really results. I mean, it's really the result of a conscious decision for each person to make. I mean, people are not just going to agree with you on this. People have to go down their own sort of personal checklist, and not everyone's going to go do that. You know, most people are just going to go back and fall back into the programming that, you know, is very comfortable and familiar to us. I mean, we all love Star Wars and the whole romantic idea of infinite space and traveling to other planets. But the first reaction of any educated person, you know, if you tell them there is no infinite space and, you know, the Earth is a physical stationary plane and space is possibly a non-physical illusion, or maybe something more exotic, who knows?
Oh, they get angry, don't they?
Yeah, they get a little angry, or they'll chuckle it off and assume that, you know, we're crazy or we're idiots, but we're not. But we're all sort of guilty of this. We really are. We've all sort of done this. I know I did it first. And so I think that we need to sort of help people get past that point and get them to really look at this. And, you know, sometimes it's all it takes is like, you know, like you said, them shooting themselves in the foot with these Neil deGrasse Tyson episodes where he's like trying to dog flat Earth as being stupid, and you've got Stephen Hawking's doing laser tests showing 6 feet of curvature over 3.1 miles, making him look really stupid. And again, I would urge everyone to check out Dr. Zach. He's sort of documented a recent controlled laser test, and they've only just done their sort of preliminary tests and debunked Stephen Hawking on National Geographic or wherever he does his shows. So, you know, like I said, I think it's great that they're going to go around shooting themselves in the foot like this, because you can't prove a lie to be true. You can't prove the Earth to be a spinning sphere when it is actually a stationary plane. And the more that they do these stunts, like these half-assed laser tests with supermodels doing the tests instead of scientists leveling it out and showing you what they're doing, then yeah, I'll take that any old day of the week. But this, you know, we really do have a responsibility to other people that have been tricked. We, as flat earthers, can help to sort of unplug and deprogram people from this terrible, silly lie involving the sphere Earth. But it's still up to the individual to really reconsider everything that they've been taught about theoretical physics and science fiction and all of that romance that goes on. There really is a lot of pre-programming in the American culture from the time that we're old enough to pay attention to a television, and there's really one in every room. So we're a culture that has based our lifestyle on a paradigm of infinite space and traveling to other worlds, where this little planet could just be, you know, a speck of dust in our rear view mirrors a couple generations from now. But the problem is that they're always sort of kicking the can down the road, and it's always a few generations away before we can have this technology that we're paying ridiculous amounts of money, $20 billion a year, to achieve. It's always, you know, just out of reach. You know, our grandkids will be on Mars. Well, that's what they've been telling people since the 50s. And so, you know, when is the jig going to be up? But people just keep on believing it, and the technology is always right around the corner, so people keep paying for it. But we never really see anything of value coming out of these space programs. And accept more programming. But for this, I think people should be really mad. I mean, they've stolen our money, they've lied to us, they've faked space, they've tricked our children, they've tricked us. And then you've got this whole world of science fiction culture that is really subservient to the globe, and it makes people really sort of mad when you step on their paradigm and shake things up and tell them, no, there is no galaxy far, far away, so Star Wars is technically not possible, sir, right? um, and really, the sad thing is we make most of our decisions subconsciously without doing much rational thinking about these decisions. And that's, these are big time life decisions. But most people do spend a lot of time forming their worldview or paradigm. And based on that worldview is sort of the springboard for all of our decisions. And if our worldview, if our paradigm is sort of founded on false knowledge and fallacy, then that's a problem. Most of the world, including and especially these sort of big spheres of power and influence run by lunatics who think the world is just a stepping stone to some other world, in reality, this is the only physical plane in existence as far as we can tell, and we should really cherish it, and we should really, leave it better off than we found it. And unfortunately, our culture and our paradigm is just overstuffed with science fiction programming and sort of this idea that we have this disposable planet because our great grandkids are going to be on Mars, but in fact this is all folly. It's all a fallacy. It's fabricated. So it can be difficult for people to let go of this sort of romantic idea of space travel and other worlds and even relativity and dark matter. I mean, all of these theoretical ways that we allow for us to be stuck to the side of a spinning sphere to make the theory of gravity work. Theory that has never been proven or demonstrated, and only sort of described as big G, as this gravitational constant. In fact, all of this is explained very well with simple density and buoyancy. Hot air balloons float, helium balloons float, and apples fall from trees. We don't need this sort of bizarre, outlandish theory of space and time being meshed together and, the world sort of displacing this space-time continuum to allow for gravity to push down towards. It's just ridiculous, but that's the sort of hoops that people will jump through to allow for this fallacy to work because that's their belief system. Over the years, my research has time and time again led me to this pervasive subliminal programming going into the public collective subconscious. And I honestly had no idea just how pervasive and overwhelming it actually was. Once you're awake to the fact that the world isn't a spinning sphere, but instead a stationary plane, the amount of globe Earth propaganda and subconscious inserts are alarming. These symbols and psychologically related emotions, and finally the companies benefiting from these associations in our mind, are probably not doing this to intentionally conceal the fact that the world isn't a spinning sphere, but instead people in charge of branding and advertising and artwork reflect their worldview in their artwork and help to reinforce this terrible, silly lie unintentionally. In other words, not everyone is in on this, but everyone who's plugged into the lie will subconsciously help to reinforce the fallacy without any intention to deceive others. And I'm just going to sort of end this on an unexpected quote from Joseph Goebbels. He was in charge of the Nazi propaganda back in the sort of World War II era. And I was looking for this quote from him that sort of sums this up well. But when I was searching for the verbatim quote, I found another quote as his very first quote of Joseph Goebbels on Wiki. And it's not exactly related, but I'm going to read them both, because the first one, it was just sort of chilling because I really wholeheartedly agree with this. And so, please don't label me as a Nazi or a communist, but I'll just read the quote. This is, again, Joseph Goebbels, and then I'll read the second one. But, okay, quote, "It is rotten and dismal that a world of so many 100 million people should be ruled by a single caste that has the power to lead millions to life or to death, indeed on a whim. This caste has spun its web over the entire earth. Capitalism recognizes no national boundaries. Capitalism has learned nothing from recent events and wants to learn nothing because it places its own interests ahead of those of the other millions. Can one blame those millions for standing up for their own interests and only for those interests? Can one blame them for striving to forge an international community whose purpose is the struggle against corrupt capitalism? Can one condemn a large segment of the educated Sturmer youth for protesting against the greatest ability? Is it not an abomination that people with the most brilliant intellectual gifts should sink into poverty and disintegrate while others dissipate, squander, and waste the money that could help them? You say the old propertied class also worked hard for what it has. Granted, that may be true in many cases, but do you also know about the conditions under which workers were living during the period which capitalism, quote, earned its fortune, end quote? And I would imagine that the living conditions for workers living during the period when capitalism was sort of being built up was probably not that pretty. Now, again, don't label me as a Nazi or a communist, but I would say I agree with that. But anyway, here's the quote that I was looking for. Again, this is Joseph Goebbels, and it's sort of talking about propaganda and how it works. But, quote, if you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. The lie can be maintained only for such a time as the state can shield the people from the political, economic, and or military consequences of the lie. It thus becomes vitally important for the state to use all of its powers to represent dissent, for the truth is the mortal enemy of the lie, and thus by extension, the truth is the greatest enemy of the state. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Y'all have a great evening across the plain, and we'll see you again on Saturday at 3 o'clock Eastern. God bless and good night.
Good night.
Good night.